Righto, tried to be the first one to kick off this YouTube channel. Someone else might, of course, beat me to it, but that's great if so. Thank you to George and to Andrea for taking the trouble to set this up, and I just hope that the fact that it's been set up by people in the class rather than by me is helps exert that kind of peer pressure for you to actually really give it a good go to use it. I do realise that whilst a few of you might be seasoned YouTubers, the very nature of YouTube is such that a lot of people are very reticent to use it as a sort of broadcast tool or a communication tool. Certainly, I'm one of the people that, as I mentioned in class, is not very comfortable with the idea, certainly of having my face staring down the tube, as it were, whilst I pontificate. And of course, you might be in that situation, but you can do other things. You can think more creatively. You can use screen capture software, as I'm doing here, or you can point the camera elsewhere. Whatever. It doesn't have to be about sort of looking into the whites of each other's eyes. Little moment of auto-ethnography, just to comment on a little moment of self-reflection. I'm currently using a new laptop that I've had less than a fortnight, and it's a 15-inch MacBook Pro, which I'm kind of shamefully attached to already, and it struck me that I've realised that when I had my previous laptop, that was a significantly bigger screen, 17-inch screen, you could fit more on there. Even when I had that big screen, which I've downsized from because the machines are just quite heavy and big to lug around. When I was using that screen, I would still always hook it up to a second monitor when I was sat at my desk, so that I'd roughly doubled the screen space, so I could have windows open all over the place, and it was, it felt like the way to work. And then when I had to use the laptop on the go, I used to find the 17-inch screen on its own, a bit restrictive. Funnily enough, I've got the smaller screen now, and yet in the whole time I've had this new laptop, I've not plugged the second screen in once, and it made me sit up and wonder why that is. And I have to say, I think you may think I'm reading too much into this. I think it's the newness, the sheeny shininess of my new machine is something which I'm quite finding myself quite attached to, and I think there's a sense in which I'm actually kind of enjoying almost being cocooned within this new space, albeit with sort of its tighter sort of boundaries around me. I'm actually quite enjoying living inside this new screen, and don't necessarily want to branch out at the moment. When I get more frustrated, when I get fed up of it in the future, it might well be that I end up sort of branching out and sort of spewing all my kind of windows out onto a kind of double screen, and start living the kind of chaotic sort of digital desktop life that I was living before. But for the moment, I'm actually enjoying being kind of cocooned in this smaller space. So make of that what you will. Might tell you something about the technology, might tell you something about me. I just wanted to draw your attention to the class wiki that I've set up, and remind any of you that haven't yet done so that you'll have received an invite. You should have received an invite, and let me know if you haven't. But at the time I'm making this video, only 2 people have actually put up their links to their research blogs, and I'd encourage you to do that as soon as possible if you haven't done so already, so that we can actually start looking at each other's blogs and actually sort of turning this thing into more of a conversation. What I do want to say about the wiki is that I think for it to work, it has to be genuinely collaborative, and so I really don't have a kind of strong sense or preconception of how the thing should look. And it's not just the content that I want you to sort of feel free to go at and sort of sort of mash up how you see fit. It's also the structure, the way that the information is ordered and structured, and the kind of sections and the pages and all this sort of stuff. So I want to say kind of go for it, and yet at the same time I also want to point out that what's kind of sort of tricky about it, a wiki, is that for it to work well, it needs to be collaborative, and yet it also needs to find, through that collaborative process, it needs to find some kind of order, as opposed to chaos. I think these things, when lots of people are contributing to them, there can be a certain amount of entropy, a certain slide into chaos, and I think it's important that we try and think about how these things can be kept relatively ordered, so that the information is kind of usable and the structure is kind of clean. So that's the challenge I sort of put down in front of you, is to sort of make this thing be creative whilst also thinking about how a wiki is not particularly well suited to kind of chaotic information layout, but actually something quite sort of ordered and intuitive. I do want to say, as sort of reinforce the point I've made just on the front page there, that I think it's important that for this to work, when you contribute stuff to the wiki, you don't feel like you're investing your whole ego in it. You don't feel too precious about the content. You're welcoming. By virtue of putting stuff up there, by contributing to it, you're welcoming people then to come along and adapt what you've done, and sometimes change what you've done, and that what you have done is not necessarily the last word on the matter. And at the same time, if you're one of the people coming in and changing and modifying other people's material, then that you sort of treat that sort of sensitively. You ask yourself, well, how could I make it better? I don't want to change the stuff unless I can improve upon it in some way. And sort of the fact that you can use the discussion page, for example, to sort of navigate some of the kind of social challenges, some of the sort of social etiquette and challenges involved in working collaboratively. This isn't just a technical or technological challenge. It's also a sort of social one, and that's a challenge in itself. I do want you to think of these things, like the wiki and the YouTube channel, as serious experiments, as things that you really that we might allow to fail, but that we make a serious effort to try and make succeed before they fail at the very least. And maybe who knows? Maybe they won't fail. Maybe they'll become extremely successful. But they are sources of primary data for you. They're sources of sort of first-hand experience of engaging collaboratively using different digital platforms, and therefore give you material to reflect on and to think about in your work in this course. Now, what did I want to mention? Just one more thing. I might just point you in the direction of this thing, which I've recently joined. This is Communication Space, and it's interesting in its own right, given what it is. It's actually kind of modelled on Facebook, in the sense that it's about making connections, friending people. It's about setting up groups, but it's what's different here is that this is using the kind of the network architecture of Facebook and its ilk specifically for the media and communication studies research community, and that's why you might be interested in joining it and get something out of it yourself. And I think it's new. I don't know if it will really take off, but it seems to be attracting lots of members already, even though it's relatively new, and it's not got critical mass yet. But it might become a really useful network, and I've certainly joined a couple of particular interest groups, like a social media research group, for example. There's lots of people interested, unsurprisingly, in new media, engaging with this network. So why not have a look at that? It is brought to you by Sage, one of the big gatekeepers, one of the big powerful corporations that have a major influence on academic publishing, and actually help in some ways to keep information the preserve of elite universities and institutions that can afford to pay for it, but let's forgive them that for the moment at least, and because this is this is an open network, and it's an interesting kind of experiment. I suppose it gives them an inroad into sort of trying to understand the academic publishing market. It's a form of it's a way that they can advertise their brand, of course, and advertise and sort of promote the Sage brand, but it's also a place where they can look into the kinds of topics and ideas that are exercising people in the media and communications research communities, and so sort of tailor their products accordingly. So one last thing I just wanted to mention was that next week's class we'll be looking at blogging and digital authorship, and I want us to look at not just at text blogging, but begin to look at also at video blogging. And when we talk about authorship, I'd have to say I'm especially interested in the idea of authoring of the self, and authoring selves via digital platforms. And you might want to sort of bear that in mind as you do some reading around the subject of blogging, bring in perhaps some good examples of blogs that you read or you think are noteworthy, or blogs that you particularly hate, or equally examples of video blogs and so on, and hopefully we'll get a good discussion going, and we'll have a chance to begin to look at in a little bit more detail at the notion of the blog and genres of blog writing. So I look forward to seeing you next week.